Back from across the Channel to defend his deal, the Prime Minister came to Parliament, 7 men down. 6 ministers who sit in the Cabinet and 1 MP who'd like to chair it. Boris Johnson's decision to back the Leave campaign unnerved some of the Prime Minister's supporters and fired up critics in his own party.
Why do so many people question your motives?
There's always going to be a lot of bickering and moaning.
Boris Johnson in the past has raised the idea that a vote to leave in June would not mean Britain leaving the EU straight away, but would trigger another, better negotiation, which saw EU countries cave in to British demands. David Cameron told MPs that was fantasy.
Having a second renegotiation followed by a second referendum is not on the ballot paper. And for a Prime Minister to ignore the express will of the British people to leave the EU would not just be wrong, it would be undemocratic. On the diplomacy, the idea that other European countries would be ready to start a second negotiation is for the birds. Many are under pressure for what they have already agreed. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, I have known a number of couples who've begun divorce proceedings, but I do not know of any who've begun divorce proceedings in order to renew their marriage vows.
Most of the laughter and cheers throughout his address came from the Labour benches. His own were pretty quiet. He ended with a thinly veiled swipe at Boris Johnson's ambition to have his job.
I am not standing for re-election. I have no other agenda. I have no other agenda than what is best for our country. I'm standing here telling you what I think. My responsibility as Prime Minister is to speak plainly about what I believe is right for our country. And that is what I will do every day for the next 4 months. And I commend this statement to the House.
Mr. Boris Johnson!
As Boris Johnson rose, he was cheered by some fellow Brexit supporters, dismissed by one Remain MP sitting behind him, heckled by another.
Can I ask my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to explain to the House and to the country in exactly what way this deal returns sovereignty over any field of lawmaking to these Houses of Parliament?
This deal brings back some welfare powers. It brings back some immigration powers. It brings back some bailout powers. It means that the ratchet of the European Court taking power away from this country cannot happen in future.
Rubbish, the Mayor of London said. Tory promises of best behaviour on both sides already forgotten. Then it was the Labour bench's turn to go quiet when Jeremy Corbyn spoke.
Last week, like him, I was in Brussels meeting with heads of government and leaders of European socialist parties, one of whom said to me,
"Who are you?" a Tory MP shouted. It was the only moment of unity on the Tory benches all afternoon. Some Labour MPs struggled to keep a straight face.
Mr. Speaker, if the party opposite would care to think for a moment about what's going on, one person said to me, and I thought it was quite profound, he said, "We are discussing the future of a continent." And one English Tory has reduced it to the issue of taking away benefits from workers and children.
Tory MPs lined up to question just how much the Prime Minister's deal really changed things for Britain.
Doesn't this actually show the problem that for so much Labour, he has achieved so little?
If we take the risk of remaining in the EU, how many defeats does the Prime Minister expect in the next 2 decades?
This morning there were Tory MPs on both sides of the EU divide, morose at the sight of their party at war over the weekend. Several muttering that David Cameron would not last in office long after the referendum. Some of your colleagues have been coming up to me today saying David Cameron's toast. He's not going to get to 2019. He might not get to the end of the year, even if he wins the referendum.
Politics is a high-risk game. If you reach for the stars and miss, it's a long way to fall.
Some in number 10 think this a febrile moment that will pass, but they couldn't let Boris Johnson take a punch at their man without punching back. They hope they've proved David Cameron's up for the fight without raising the chances of it getting very vicious.